Hi class, we're going to quickly review this activity. So it says activity intertidal zones, or zonation. So to look at zonation, we are going to start by looking at this intertidal activity, which you should have done today in class. So it says, how do species vary within tidal zones? So we're looking at a group of species, and in fact, we're given a lot of information about the intertidal zone within this packet. So we're going to be looking at 10 different species of organisms and where they live along the coast based on some of their niche requirements for those organisms. So if we look, it starts out, it walks us through the different tidal zones, and we're supposed to just diagram them on our back diagram, so I didn't have just ocean colors, so I just made do with the colors that I had and labeling the different zones. So we had our subtidal zone, which is always wet. We have our low tide zone, okay, we have our middle tide zone, our high tide zone, and then our splash zone. So that means that really the splash zone just gets wet from the waves, or if there's a really bad storm, then it might be covered in water. Then we're asked to take a look at our different organisms. So we'll just spread them out real quick. So we've got a crab. Well, I'll put them where we can see some of them at a time. We have barnacles. We have, this is called a sea squirt. We have an oyster. We have a, mussels, some type of fish that looks like an anemone. This is called a sea whip. We have another fish. And then we have some type of sponge. So based on this, we're supposed to predict the zones in which they live just based on their images alone. So I might think, okay, fish absolutely have to live underwater, so they can't live somewhere where it's going to occasionally dry out, right? So I might say that they live in that subtidal zone. Then looking around, maybe I think, barnacles I've seen in many places. I've actually seen them attached to oysters and mussels, so maybe I think they would live in the same zone. These are just predictions, and I'm looking at the adaptations. So I know that these connect to hard surfaces, that's why they live on the surface of this, and I've also seen them on the surfaces, like here we have this dock piling here, so these harder surfaces within the water. If there happens to be a dock out in the water or some rocks, then you can see them attached to surfaces, and because I've seen them, I feel like they are occasionally exposed, so maybe they live in the intertidal zone, so that's just the location between the low tide and the high tide. So maybe I would predict that, and then I'm just going to go through all of them, like crabs. I've definitely walked along the beach at low tide and see crabs like run out of their little holes and move around. Okay, even though they are covered, I've seen them covered at high tide too. So maybe I make my prediction that they live in the intertidal zone as well. So just based on what they look like and what you might know about them. And so maybe I'm less sure about these. Maybe I think, okay, these must live underwater. They just look like that. So I might put that in the subtidal zone. It's up to you. This, I don't think I've ever seen, so I'm just going to make a prediction. Looks real squishy. Maybe it needs a lot of water. Okay, so making my predictions just based on their appearance. Then from there, I'm going to actually analyze the information that's given. So I flip them over. Some of them are real specific about where they live, so they can actually live in several zones. This is mid to low tidal, or mid to low intertidal zone. Mid to low tide. This one specifies it has to attach to hard surfaces, so I'll flip it over. So that's the barnacle. And surfaces, and it says it can live in the splash and high tide zone, so I can make a note of that on my activity. And then I'm going through and I'm just doing the same thing for all of them. So when I'm done, okay, I'm going to try and place them here where I think they would live. So if I think they need to live more in the open space, I can put them there. If I believe that they need to live on the dock piling, like they need something hard to attach to, well, that's my dock piling, okay? So they have to attach there. Once I do that for all of my organisms, I'm going to complete this chart, so just where they live, and I'll see some overlap. So I see the barnacle in 2 locations. I see the mud crab in a few locations. See, quite a few of them actually can inhabit multiple locations. So either that intertidal zone or the subtidal zone. Please remember the intertidal zone is always, always wet, always covered in water. If we're looking at these different zones, the intertidal zone does include the low middle and high tide zone. However, some of the organisms require a little bit more water. So they require more water. We're going to put them here. The high tide zone means that they could actually spend quite a bit of time without being covered in water. So if you look at the barnacle actually says that it has a valve that it can close in order to stay moist. So it can survive even in the high tide zone and the splash zone. And the high tide zone technically is part of the intertidal zone. So that asks us some questions about the factors that allow these organisms to live there. So remember, they're all occupying these slightly different niches in the environment. So they have different resource requirements, and they have different tolerances or adaptations as well. So we're just looking at that information. This should have been a very quick activity to complete in class. So I will leave it at that. And we're going to also do a screencast, and I'll post that soon.